promoting the free exchange of ideas, questioning the status quo, and having some fun along the way. This is the Are We Idiots Show. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Are We Idiots Show. And we are your hosts, as always, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Top of the evening to you, Mark Weaver. The summer is flying by. It is really true that as you get older, time goes by even faster.
Episode 24. We've been at this close to a half a year, if my math's right? 26 is a half
I
year?
can't trust your math, but yes.
And you won't trust my science by the end of this episode. All right, so just before we get started, I'm curious, because when we were on vacation a couple weeks back, we did a All Idiots of the Week show. And I'm curious, listeners, if you listen to that episode, I believe it was episode 22 or 21, but either way, give us some feedback on that. We have some more vacation coming up in August, and we're wondering what to do as another filler episode. And we had fun doing that All Idiots of the Week show. We may do that again, but curious what you think. Send us an email, suggestions@areweidiots.com, and give us your feedback.
One thing I'm thinking, I'm getting a lot of texts from multiple text groups about Trump. There's just so many things Trump's in the news for, good and bad. And we have some incredible, staunch Trump-supporting lovers, and we have some incredible polar opposite Trump-hating detractors. So I'm thinking about a show with a guest where I would monitor in between you as the Trump hater.
That's a false classification.
Okay,
I am not a Democrat or a Republican, therefore I am an objective observer. I don't like about 80% of what
that's fine.
he
There
is.
you go. 80%. That's enough for me to work with.
Yeah, but
so we have an 80%.
that could change. I could be 100% approval if he changed his principles.
Don't try to overtalk me shouting at you. So I would like to sit in between you and 80% Trump detractor and one of our 99% Trump promoters, and just kind of have a little debate between you guys.
Yeah, I had to think about that.
All right, you think about that.
All right, so on our show this week, we're doing Idiot of the Week award, and Rich has some nominees here. It's probably going to be one of your nominees has to be Trump for saying tariffs are the greatest, right? That's got to be one of your nominees this week.
See, you're already playing into a good show.
Then we're going to talk Professor Kroll. I told you last week, Professor Kroll is in studio. We're talking Big Bang versus intelligent design, a very heady discussion and a very interesting topic. And then we're going to conclude the show with idiotic science. So we're going to stay with the science theme as we conclude the show. And we're going to tell you about some things that used to be a hard science, or at least theories and opinions. Turned out they weren't so accurate.
Amazing.
All right, so Idiot of the Week award. Richie, your nominees, please.
I'm not throwing Trump in this week, but I am going back to somebody for the first time as a second nominee.
Repetitive.
So this is the first time I've brought somebody
They must
up.
be deserving.
Well, and it's tied to an existing situation we brought up weeks ago, but it's not quite going away. So it just struck me as I got a nominator.
Go for it.
Roseanne Barr. All right. So as we all know, when we brought her up as Idiot of the Week, which you nominated her about a month ago.
Idiot of her life, I think.
Idiot of her life, you said. So she apologized again for her controversial Twitter comment that caused the cancellation of her show, Roseanne. And she keeps insisting that she has been misunderstood. Although this mistake has cost her everything, she says people are taking this wrong. She had an hour-long television interview, I think this week, her first since the May tweet. And she insists the tweet was political, not racist.
Well, she was on Hannity, right?
That was Hannity. Yes.
So I'm already skeptical, but okay.
So she said the tweet about former Obama advisor Valerie Jarrett, which she said if Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby equals VJ. Now, there's not a lot of ways to wiggle your way out of this.
I thought she blamed Ambien.
Well, yes, she blamed Ambien and beers and depression medicine at 2 a.m., but she's still not getting off of her high horse. So she said her tweet was a bid to seek accountability for the 2015 international agreement limiting Iran's nuclear program. Now, granted, Jarrett was born in Iran, and her parents are European and African American, but for her to put a twist on it to Iran is pretty interesting. She also said, I did not know she was black. She said, I'm sorry that you feel harmed and hurt because I never meant that. I've apologized a lot. I feel that I've apologized and explained and asked for forgiveness and made recompense, but I have donated to several African American things.
Recompense? Is that what you meant?
What did I say?
Recompense?
I never even saw that word in my life. Let me repeat that.
Usually you would bust on me about my vocabulary,
call me
my
out.
spelling.
Yeah,
I can bust on your vocabulary. You can bust on my spelling.
Recompense. I don't even know what that word is. But
Recompense.
She said, recompense. Don't use that word. All right? But think about it. She said, to kind of make up for that she's a supporter of the African American community, she says, I've donated to several African American things. Right? And then she closed with, anybody who is in any kind of position of power deserves to have a joke about them, and if they can't laugh at themselves, that means something.
Well, that I agree with. Everyone's got to lighten up and be able to. People should be able to say whatever they want. There has to be consequences to it.
If you call a black person from the Planet of the Apes, I don't know that's.
I totally agree.
fits in that.
So what is your take on her nominee this week? Just she's continuing to be an idiot.
She just won't put it.
She took it to another level of
it to another
idiotic.
level.
Okay. So what's the second nominee?
So this one has implications for multiple people and multiple angles. So Stormy Daniels' husband,
Okay.
Glendon Crane,
I think we already have a winner.
has filed for divorce from the adult film actress, citing adultery. Now, you got to understand something, and I'm going to get into this a little bit more. Glendon Crane is also a pornographic film performer who performs as Brendan Miller. So he has a career that involves adultery. She had a career that involved adultery. She still apparently does.
Well, no, of course it doesn't count because you're working.
Correct.
That's his
part of
angle?
it. That's part of it.
Oh,
Crane
my
cites
goodness.
adultery as the reason for the divorce and seeks sole custody of their 7-year-old daughter. I feel very sorry for this poor little girl, as well as financial award and disproportionate share of the couple's community property. So I also think it's about money.
Sure.
He's asking for a restraining order against his wife to prevent Stormy Daniels from taking their daughter on her Make America Horny Again strip club tour.
I thought that was already in process. So
It is.
Okay, so it doesn't
But
want her
she's-
to go any further.
She doesn't want the 7-year-old going with her mother. So
that's probably some good parenting there.
now Daniels denies this alleged adultery. But check it out. Last week, Daniels was charged with 3 counts of illegal sexually oriented activity at a strip club after officials said she'd committed sexual acts with 3 undercover Columbus, Ohio, vice police officers. That's a whole other story. How does a police officer undercover actually engage in an illegal activity?
Well,
That's another story.
Cops set traps all the time, but whatever.
But then to go ahead with it. Hours later, however, the charges were dropped, and this is going to go back to your stupid laws, because in Ohio, employees who regularly appear in the nude and semi-nude are subject to this law. If you're not a regular performer, you're not subject to that law.
How do you define regular?
Well, that's why there's so many idiots in this story. You have
So is it the husband that's the idiot, or Stormy Daniels that's the idiot?
how we just
The cops, the laws, the Ohio legislature. Take your pick.
take your pick, whichever one you think's the stupidest out of all those,
Wow.
or most stupid.
So I would say Stormy Daniels is the stupidest because I'm a big advocate for children. And if you're taking your 7-year-old, was it? 7-year-old
Seven-year-old
daughter on a Make America Horny Again tour, to me that rises to another level. So I would say that Stormy Daniels, you are our idiot of the week for that reason alone. Although we could give it to you on many other grounds.
You'll send the dollar to the police force in Ohio?
I just want to hear you say recompense again.
I can't even say it. Even when I know how to say it, I can't say it.
All right, so I'll send $1. What if my wife finds out I sent $1 to Stormy Daniels?
Then have her send it.
All right, so we're going to transition to a much more heady subject. I mean, how could it be any more heady than Stormy Daniels? But we're going to talk about Big Bang versus intelligent design. And I think for our audience, you've spent a lot of time, Rich, thinking about this subject, researching the subject, talking about this subject, but not all of our audience has. So let's start with first, you just taking a couple minutes to define what the common definition of Big Bang and the common definition of intelligent design is in layman's terms.
All right, so
so we can lay out what the audience knows what we're talking about.
I'll lay it out, and then I'll explain how we even got to this point. So, obviously, there's stuff all around us. Humans, animals, plants, stars, clouds, water. Where did this all come from?
It's one of the biggest questions in life.
It's one of the biggest questions in life, absolutely. So, there's one theory, which I think makes more sense, the intelligent designer theory, or that a god or your god or some higher power created everything or designed everything and put it all together. A lot more complex than that, but I'll get into that in a little bit. The second one is the Big Bang or evolution theory, and that is where 14 billion years ago, nothing, literally nothing, started to contract and heat up to the point of an explosion at a bazillion degrees that sent newly created elements and particles scattering at the speed of light across the universe, forming our galaxies through frictionless space, because there's nothing, as it's penetrating nothing. And then ultimately...
You're putting your bias into each of these definitions, by the way.
Is it obvious?
Yeah, just a little.
Then, after billions of years of cooling down and galaxies and solar systems setting into place, planets formed, and
the conditions for life
existed, which started with a single cell basically crawling out of water and leading to the animals and then ultimately humans.
Right. And so, and obviously this whole subject also ties into whether there's a God or not, but let's not deal with that whole subject. But I think we have to assume that if there was an intelligent designer, there is some God of some definition, right? I think that's
correct.
Okay. All right. So let's at least talk about evolution, because you brought it up in your definition.
Can I just for a second even let the folks know why that we got here and why I have any credibility at all? So my dad, I mentioned this probably 2 or 3 times over the last 26 weeks, was
24.
the head of biology at Rosemont College, and we had a lot of talks through the years. And he was also into studying genetics and mutations and evolution. And I had a lot of questions. I mean, in my life, I was born and raised Roman Catholic. About 20 years into it, I kind of left the church. I didn't become an atheist or an agnostic. I still believed in God, but I really didn't follow anything for the next 20 years. And then I got back into it after researching for a couple years and a lot of books and a lot of questions and talking to a lot of people. I came out of that a Christian. So that's another story for another show. But because of that, I looked into a lot of the creationism versus evolution premise. And my dad once said, listen, and he was a Roman Catholic, he said, hey, look, a lot of scientists can't accept religion, but I can. And religion and science absolutely go hand in hand.
They can coexist.
And they can coexist and make a lot of sense. So I, through the years, have gotten into debates, very friendly debates. I have some close friends that are atheists. They're systems engineers. They're highly intelligent. They're smarter than me by a couple IQ points.
Just a couple.
Just a couple. They're Mensa members, and I'm fighting to become a Mensa member. But we've had debates over a couple beers for an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. And by the end of it, I've held my ground. And all of them have looked at me and said, wow, you've given me something to consider. You've given me something that I haven't thought about.
So much like you, I am a Christian, and I was raised in a fundamentalist Christian environment where the Bible and Genesis in particular was taught as, literal. And, in Genesis it says that God created the world in 7 days. And I always had questions about that. I think, maybe you and I disagree. We never talked about this, but, I think that it wasn't created in 7 literal days. It was the translation from the Hebrew. Yom was the word, and that could be interpreted as eras. And I think there's a lot of evidence that the world is old. It's not young. It wasn't created in 7 literal days. And I had a lot of questions about my faith, and I explored this subject. And really, what I came down on is that there was evolution. There's no doubt there was evolution, but it's, so far as I can tell, only microevolution. And, that Darwin's theory of natural selection, or survival of the fittest, it's sometimes called, is a sound theory. But, does that mean that there didn't need to be a God for man to exist? Now, Stephen Hawking, before he died, said as such. But I don't think there's any clarity on this. I mean, this is an unanswered question in biology, right? I mean, I think there's still a lot of debate about this, right?
Huge debate. And remember, Darwin did make a comment, something to the effect of, I can see how most people would see an intelligent designer when you look at everything and all the complexity and variation. But he said it doesn't make sense to him. When he looked at individual species, and that was a big part of his study, that it was too random. It made no sense that a God would get down into the nitty gritty of different colored feathers on a bird. And so Darwin said evolution absolutely has to stand on its own without an intelligent designer. There's a lot of famous biologists and scientists that believe evolution stands on its own.
And if you read On Origin of Species, it's a brilliant book. But Darwin himself questions this all the way through it. I mean, he always proposes it as, this is what I believe, but I could be wrong. I mean, he's got questions as he's writing this theory, which turned out to be groundbreaking. But it wasn't fully clear to him when he was laying all this out. He believed it, but he was also open to that he didn't have all the knowledge.
So let's go through some of this.
Go for it.
So I also believe there's 2 major categories here: microevolution and macroevolution. And what I think Darwin proved and was brilliant is microevolution. And he found little permutations with very, very small subtleties. And I'll use the example of, maybe over 1 million years, a giraffe grew its neck long enough to eat leaves off of trees, but that were too high up in the air that he otherwise could not have gotten to. So macroevolution's never been proved. And I talked a lot about this with my dad when he was alive. You look at in fossil categories, one of the big
and
3.
Macroevolution for the audience is where one species evolves into another one, right? That's how you would define it.
Yes, where something all of a sudden pops up brand new.
Well, it's not all of a sudden. It's over millions of years. That's the theory.
Well, that's microevolution. So you got to look at microevolution is fingernails getting longer, or a nose getting bigger, or a color adaptation. Macroevolution is a bigger category where all of a sudden a new species, I say all of a sudden because
it's still over millions of years though.
But they've never found missing links to these new species.
I totally agree with that. But the theory of macroevolution is that a new species could develop over millions and millions, tens of millions of years because of the varieties.
Correct. Yeah. I say all of a sudden, meaning that next generation missing link, which would
Right.
then
It turns to a new species.
turns into a new species.
Exactly. Okay.
That's an all of a sudden
Yeah,
situation.
okay. Gotcha.
Now, so a couple things. And there's a famous, I guess, biologist or geneticist, Julian Huxley, that said that genetic mutation is the foundation for evolution. So if you look at this development that ultimately even produced man, if you were to reduce it to a formula, it would look like this: mutations plus natural selection times time equals evolution.
Yes.
And Huxley said not only is it an effective agency of evolution, but it's the only effective agency of evolution. So let's look at three categories, the first being mutations. And evolutionists say mutations, just like you just explained, little changes over time lead to bigger and better things. But remember, mutations that are sudden small changes in the DNA code of genes and they're passed on to offspring and then are preserved, okay?
Because those traits are deemed to help you survive better, and the ones that aren't good, they kill off people, basically.
Correct. Mutations are rare and usually harmful. So if these mutations are taking place, wouldn't that kill off the species, right?
Hey, my first son had a genetic mutation.
And he didn't make it, unfortunately.
Right.
It's not like he became a superpower.
Right.
There was another geneticist or biologist, Theodosius Dobrzhansky, who acknowledged that most mutants are more or less disadvantageous, and that the you're going to help me with this one, deleterious character
I'm not looking at it.
of most mutations seems to be a very serious difficulty. So, first of all, mutations happen like 1 in a million.
Right.
And when they do, it's usually not a good thing. And there's been a ton, and my dad did a lot of these studies with fruit flies. So the beauty of fruit flies and doing genetic mutation and DNA studies is that they go through a whole lifespan in a week. And you still have to run millions and millions of experiments just to get something minor to change, right?
Right.
And to think that this would lead to, and I'll get into my dissertation, I'll put it all together at the end, but that it would lead to a single-celled organism that has no intelligence that led to human beings, with all the complexity of all the interchangeable parts, this math starts to add up, and the math is what I'm going to get into soon. So where do these new genes come from? Well, by the way, no mutations ever produced a new species or even a new organ or system in an existing species. Yet this had to occur if evolution is valid. Protozoa, for instance, right, which we came from ultimately, do not have teeth. Where then did the genes come from that produce teeth if we have evolved from protozoa? So, as far as mutations go, it's kind of counterintuitive to how evolution works. Another example, in the evolution of the eye, if the mutation that made the tear duct occurred first, would natural selection keep it in the organism until after other mutations happened that produced eyelashes, the eye slit, the cornea lens, etc.? Or would natural selection breed out the organism that had a tear duct that appeared to be useful or useless? So the more you look into mutations, it doesn't lead to better, more complex survival of the fittest. It actually kills off what's not better. There's no such thing as mutation by definition is not, hey, I mutated into a smarter guy or stronger guy or a healthier guy. A mutation's a defect. Typically.
Okay, well then maybe I would use the word trait then, as opposed to mutation. So a trait could be a positive and therefore help that species survive better. So inheritable traits that are positive surely help some survive and weaker ones that don't have that trait not survive. That's different from a mutation.
Let me clarify a little bit. A mutation is a trait, but the majority of the time they're negative.
Yeah, but there are some, and that's if you look at how humans have evolved, they're bigger, stronger, taller, less birth defects. I hate that term, but less mutations because, over time, the weaker ones have.
But a
have
lot
not
of that
propagated.
has to do with nutrition. And our bones and our muscles got bigger to better nutrition. The body grows, cells replicate, duplicate due to nutrition, not necessarily mutations. A mutation would be, all of a sudden eyesight, perfect vision 20/20 going to 10/10 or something, things like that. So, but I'm giving mutations as one of the explanations, and over time, right? Even
A lot of time.
a lot of time, right? So let's say the 1 out of a million positive mutations over millions or billions of years leads to that.
Right. Now, do you believe, in a lot of ways, if you come from a Christian background, and in my case, it was more of a fundamentalist Christian background, which, I have questions about, some of the timelines that traditional fundamentalist Christians believe. To me, it comes down to, if you believe in an intelligent designer, the real issue is, did God do it through miracles or through a process? And I'm squarely in the process realm. But that's also a question here is there any validity to the miracles? And I know it's hard to prove a miracle, because if you have faith, that you have to believe in stuff that you can't prove. That's the whole nature of faith.
So I would think both. I mean,
Okay.
Let me take a step back and say, I believe in the Big Bang Theory, but I believe
It was orchestrated.
it was orchestrated. An intelligent designer started the Big Bang and provided the elements. Otherwise, how does nothing turn into something? Right? When the Big Bang exploded, all of a sudden there was helium and hydrogen. And then as that got heated up and solidified, then we had other elements come out of that, like oxygen and nitrogen. And then from those elements formed water and rocks. Like, where did that stuff come from? A premortal white blanket soup of nothing.
And again, I'm in your camp here, but I would always be guarded about saying anything with certainty that's not provable. So there's information that we don't know. I mean, that's been proven throughout history, that information continues to come out. And if Stephen Hawking, who's most people would say is the smartest guy who's lived in the last 50 years or so, he basically said, well, you didn't need a God for life to come about. So how would you, I'm playing devil's advocate, how would you respond to that?
Einstein, who I would say was even smarter than him
Yeah,
in
probably.
the last 100 years, said there had to be a God. So, but that's he said, she said.
Right.
So let's take it a step further. Because
We got about 7 minutes to.
I like to
wrap this
investigate.
up.
You may have to give me a couple more minutes. I like to investigate things and make my own decisions. I don't make any conclusions just up front on blind faith. Okay, so let's look at the math of the mutations.
Go for it.
Because this is where, for me, this alone is where the evolution argument falls apart. So the length of time is on the evolution side, and it needs to be. Now, if you look at the Earth supposedly starting 14 billion years ago, when it all came to settle and the right temperature and everything was livable, Huxley even said, all living things are equally old. They can all trace their ancestry back some 2 billion years. So now we're fitting evolution into a 2 billion year time frame. Mm-hmm. But let's look at this claim, putting it to mathematical tests. Okay? So many scientists and mathematicians, looking at the structure of chromosomes, DNA, protein, have calculated that the odds are 10 to the 161st power to 1 that not one usable protein would have been produced by chance in all the history of the Earth, using all the appropriate atoms on Earth at the fantastic rate described, speed of light initially. And you got to remember, this is a figure containing 161 zeros. Because some of my smart friends...
I wasn't a math major, but that seems pretty unlikely.
Here's what happens in statistics. So where my smart atheist friends always got me, were like, well, geez, over 2 billion years and billions and billions of organisms and planets and things going on, finally it's going to come together. And I used to say, geez, you kind of got me there. Maybe statistically that's true. But as I looked into the numbers more, okay, then there's another scientist, Morowitz, his minimal cell has 239 protein molecules required that include at least 124 different protein species. So if we're at 10 to the 161st power to 1 times 239, you can see these numbers start to get insane. And ultimately, French scientist Lecomte de Neuilly said it is one chance out of, he calculated, 10 to the 243rd power. So
I think you're losing our audience there, Richie. We're going too deep in the math.
well, the reason why
Most people can't even do algebra.
Okay, but the reason why I just went through that
Yep.
is because what does that mean? Okay, what does that mean for all you laymen? The mathematical probability would take hundreds of trillions of years for everything to fall in place to create life at the advanced stage we know it today. Now, so I didn't even know that. I did some digging. So when someone says, oh, over 2 billion years, anything can happen. Well, no, based on all this protein alignment, it would take hundreds of trillions of years. So for me there, and then we get
That's
into...
a bridge too far for you.
All right, that's a bridge way too far. So billions sounds like a lot. It's really not in the scheme of life and the universe. Now, there's other problems. And I won't present them as problems initially, but let's say the second law of thermodynamics. What is that, you layman's? The second law states that energy in the cosmos remains constant, but the amount available to do useful work is always decreasing. So therefore, everything is moving toward less orderliness and greater chaos. But evolution is the opposite, right? You can't have more chaos because that's more negative mutations. But many evolutionists state that evolution was the grand exception to the second law. So, but how do you get around that? Right? And again, they use over time, 2 billion years, things can happen. But that law never took a break. Or if it took a break, it was only temporary. So evolutionism breaks the second law of thermodynamics. I get into that more, but we don't have a ton of time. The example used is if the sun were to beat down on a concrete block for 2 billion years and get hotter and hotter, that block's staying a block, or maybe it's melting to nothing. It's not turning into gold or a tree or a frog. So the last argument for evolutionists is the fossil record. And they say if you look at the fossil record, different strata go from basic to advanced, showing evolution. But then there's tons of strata where advanced microorganisms or even organisms are lower to the bottom. And if you do carbon dating and other types of dating, it's very inaccurate.
Very inaccurate. That I know.
There's a volcano in Hawaii that erupted. It's only been a 100-year volcano. They did carbon testing on some of the lava, and it came back 100,000 years old to 40 million years old.
Right.
So there's a lot of impacts on dating testing. But I'm rambling on here a little bit. I know we're running out of time, but here's my explanation.
Summarize.
I'm going to summarize why I don't believe in macroevolution. So you take big nothing premortal soup, you heat it up to a gazillion degrees, it explodes, it forms new elements, and it forms new substances. And then ultimately, billions of galaxies, and in one particular galaxy or solar system where the Earth exists, it all comes together in the right formula with water. But we didn't even get into the vegetation.
Yeah. Water, heat, light.
In parallel, where did the vegetation and fruits and vegetables and plants and trees come from? We didn't even get into that. Right. But here's what I can't picture. A microscopic single cell, okay, with no intelligence, decides to get out of the water. I got to form feet. Okay. And then it forms feet to walk out of there. But, oh, wait a minute. I need to breathe. I need to develop a respiratory system and lungs and a nose. Oh, wait a minute. I need to create a breathing heart and arteries and a circulatory system. Right? You know there's 60,000 miles of blood vessels?
I do
60,000 miles,
I
right?
don't know the exact number, but
and then by the way, to support that kind of stuff and organs, liver, kidneys, which there's the digestive system and the immune system. We got to form a skeletal system with 206 bones. Oh, and then we got to form skin to cover all this stuff. 10 very unique systems that I could see any one of them taking 1 trillion years to form.
It's infinitesimally, is that a good word? Infinitesimally possible, I guess. But
then the eyeball. We don't even get it. Even my smartest engineering friends can't explain how the an eyeball would develop, taking in light, creating pictures the brain can produce. And, oh, wait a minute.
It's amazing.
Guess what I left out? For all this to happen, you need a central repository orchestrator, the human brain.
Right.
Right? The
Which
human brain,
no one still yet understands.
nobody understands it. We only use 5 to 10% of our brain, and it's got more cognitive reasoning.
Me a little less.
You probably use about 3. But the human brain has more cognitive reasoning and emotional aspects to it than all the supercomputers combined in the world. So how the heck, hence the going back to the mathematicians, it would take hundreds of trillions of years for all this stuff to come together.
Wow, my 3% of brain use is hurting right now because of Professor Kroll's biology class. Just like you get lost in the economics class of Professor Weaver, I got lost. I got lost in the biology class.
Let me just put it in terms for you. If I took the 273 moving parts of a Rolex watch and I threw it into a dryer, even after 2 billion years, it would never come together and form a Rolex watch, or even after 100 trillion years.
Well, my guess is we have some listeners out there that may disagree with us, and that's okay. That's what part of the show is. We're expressing opinions and bringing up facts that we think are facts. But if you have ideas that disprove Rich's theories, we want to hear from you. Suggestions at areweidiots.com. We're going to have to move a little quickly here as we conclude the show. We thought we'd finish with a few humorous things that used to be known or theorized in the medical realm. So and I'll have to skip a bunch of them, but
don't. People want to listen. They tell me
Well, we're running a little long. So bloodletting, we know that. Physicians used to...
That doesn't work?
Drain blood, and they used to use leeches, too. There used to be a thing called toothworm, Rich. It was supposed that most diseases of the teeth were caused by small worms resident within the tooth, eating it away. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
Back in the 19th century, they had soothing syrups.
Ah.
For stressed mothers. Turns out they were laced with narcotics. 1 teaspoon or 1 ounce had 65 milligrams of morphine. They used to give it to kids for stressed mothers. The kids were probably laid out prone on the floor.
It did work, though, right?
Yeah, it worked. Speaking of that, Bayer is a German company, actually supplied the Nazis. We don't want to go into that. But they marketed heroin as a cough suppressant. So, you were addicted at the end, but you didn't cough.
No, you did not cough.
What else? The flat earth theory. That was everyone now discounts that, except for Kyrie Irving. He still believes in
it's
flat earth. Home remedies, drinking alcohol to get rid of a hangover. The supposed hair of the dog. It's debunked. Ear candling, which I have tried. You ever try that? Ear candling, you put it...
Only someone who uses 3% of their brain would try this one.
Well, it's my wife's deal. But actually, you put a candle in your ear, and it's like a funnel, and it like supposedly sucks out the wax. It actually seems to have worked, but maybe...
I think it sucks out your brain is what it does.
There was I mentioned to you maternal impression. That was a theory that a mother's thoughts created birth defects.
Wow.
What else? There's a bunch. Geocentrism. That was in the Bible. They actually thought for a long period of time that the sun and the moon and the stars all revolved around the earth.
It doesn't?
It doesn't. Now it's heliocentrism. Any other ones that you can remember? I know we have to wrap up, but...
My favorite is that in the 60s, cigarettes were marketed as positive, good for your health, relaxing. And if a lot of people don't know this, there was a cartoon in the 60s called Tobar the Eighth Man.
I remember that.
And the famous song, there once was a monster who came from outer space, created by the Martians to destroy the human race. The FBI is helpless. He's 20 stories tall, quick. Who the heck do we call? Call Tobar the Eighth Man. Well, Tobar used to grab a cigarette and puff on it to create special human powers to fight the monsters from Mars.
Lucky Strike had an ad 20,000 doctors agree. Your throat protection against irritation against cough. That was Lucky Strike's ad.
How about that?
All right, folks. Well, we have to wrap up the show. It was a great show. And if you have comments, please email us suggestions at areweidiots.com. Next week, make sure you tune in. We're going to go back to my domain a little bit. We're going to talk about the minimum wage. And most people at a surface level think it's reasonable to pay someone a minimum amount. But as with most of our topics, I'm going to tell you the other side of that. So make sure you tune in next week. And as always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See you all next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Are We Idiots Show. Please subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you can enjoy all episodes.